He was sitting in my chair. That is how the entire nightmare began. Not with a formal human resources conference, not with a pre-scheduled calendar invite, and certainly not with a respectful explanatory email from senior management. Just Howard Finch, our flavorless chief financial officer in unpressed dad jeans and a tailored navy blazer, sitting comfortably behind my oak desk on a dark, rainy Friday morning at 8:15. He had my personalized ceramic coffee mug, resting casually in his right hand, taking slow sips like it was some kind of corporate hostage. My polished brass nameplate was already stripped clean from its wooden mount and tossed carelessly into a recycling bin. My dual high-resolution monitors were still radiating warm static from the exhausting 72-hour deployment shift I had just concluded. My private desk drawers were visibly unlatched, pried open, and thoroughly gutted. The man had the sheer, unmitigated audacity to glance up and smirk at me, as if I were an unwanted trespasser barging into my own workstation. "Gordon," Howard said without bothering to stand up, adjust his posture, or offer a standard professional handshake, "we have reassessed our senior operational overhead across the Enterprise Technology Division and made necessary strategic realignments." I stood there in my wet raincoat, my arms weighed down by thick stacks of physical server diagnostics printouts, fresh from the Southeast Data Center post-mortem analysis. Those were the exact core systems that had survived a massive zero-day intrusion attempt overnight. Precisely because I had spent the last 4 years authoring my own custom firewall rules, intricate cryptographic protocols that nobody else in the entire organization understood, documented, or knew how to execute under pressure. I had literally just saved this company from a multi-million-dollar compliance breach and complete operational blackout before the sun came up. And now, this paper-pushing corporate suit was looking me straight in the eyes and classifying my entire 15-year career as redundant operational overhead. At 49 years old, after dedicating nearly a decade and a half of my life to constructing the underlying computational foundation of Apex Global Solutions, I knew far better than to indulge in a childish emotional outburst. I walked over to the credenza and set my heavy stacks of printouts down with slow, deliberate precision. I took a deep, steadying breath, adjusted my collar, and met his icy gaze without flinching. I looked around the room I had occupied for 6 years, noticing how quickly they had boxed up my personal engineering awards and framed photographs of my family. "I am not operational overhead, Howard," I replied, keeping my voice utterly calm and level. "I am the structural foundation of this entire cloud architecture. Without my custom configurations, this enterprise folds faster than your weak chin during an external federal compliance audit. You have no technical concept of what keeps these servers running, nor do you comprehend the disaster you are unleashing upon this firm." His arrogant smirk twitched for a split second. That tiny muscle spasm in his cheek was the only tell I needed to know I had struck a nerve. Before he could formulate a snappy corporate retort, he gestured casually toward the glass entryway of my office. 2 contract security guards in short-sleeved blue uniforms immediately stepped into the room. They had the nervous, shifting eyes of part-time security rentals who would much rather be sitting at home playing video games in a dark basement. They flanked me on both sides as if I were an active physical security threat preparing to cause a disturbance. The fundamental absurdity of the situation was almost staggering. These corporate executives did not even possess the basic technical literacy to comprehend what I had spent 4 years constructing in the dark. They called the core platform Vault 47 simply because that was the streamlined, non-technical label I permitted them to print on executive slide decks for board meetings. In reality, it was a living, breathing cryptographic nervous system designed with automated failover backbone, multi-region database synchronization, and end-to-end client token encryption. I had authored every single line of that software repository with sleepless hands and caffeine-fueled focus during endless nights when the only sounds in the building were the steady hum of server racks and the quiet murmur of my own thoughts. Most importantly, I had designed the cryptographic master keys to be stored exclusively in an isolated offline cold vault. I had deliberately kept those keys offline because I had long since stopped trusting executive leadership to act with integrity. Not after attending an executive retreat in Lake Tahoe 2 summers ago, where I overheard board members discussing secret plans to quietly break off and liquidate core technical assets to a rival conglomerate while sipping vintage wine that cost more than my annual performance bonus. They were far too arrogant to notice the quiet safeguards I had baked into the system. They were far too oblivious to realize that terminating me did not merely leave their infrastructure vulnerable. It left them permanently locked out. I allowed the 2 security officers to escort me down the quiet hallway toward the main elevator bank. I let them hold the heavy glass doors open for me. I let them believe they had carried out a routine corporate offboarding without incident or resistance. But just as we reached the central server facility on the 3rd floor, I paused right outside the glass partition. I turned around completely and looked Howard Finch directly in the face as he followed at a discreet distance to confirm my physical departure from the building. Did you reset the primary transport layer security certificates before you revoked my administrative credentials in the domain controller? I asked quietly. Howard stopped dead in his tracks. His jaw shifted slightly to the side. His mouth opened, then closed without making a single sound. I will take that silence as a clear no, I continued smoothly, keeping my eyes fixed on his. Good luck explaining to the external compliance auditors why your internal audit logs show your principal system architect was removed mid-cycle while holding full root authority, especially when federal notice regulations come into play. Under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, 29 United States Code, Section 2101, launching retaliatory mass restructuring without statutory 60-day notice opens your executive committee to direct personal financial liability. You are walking directly into a legal and technical disaster of your own making. Howard actually paled. The color drained from his face so rapidly it looked as though his circulation had decided to sever all ties with his ego. I turned around cleanly and stepped onto the waiting elevator. There was no screaming, no dramatic scene, and no foolish, emotional spectacle. Just the soft, rhythmic hum of the elevator doors sliding shut between us, and the heavy, terrifying silence of an executive who had just realized he had cut the parachute lines while cruising at 30,000 feet. I did not drive straight home after leaving the headquarters. Instead, I immediately initiated my personal operational security protocol. I powered down my corporate-issued laptop, removed the battery from my primary mobile device, and pulled a secondary clean burner phone from a sealed plastic bag stored beneath the passenger seat of my car. When you spend over a decade working under corporate executives who smile warmly during quarterly performance reviews while systematically gutting employee pension allocations behind closed doors, you learn how to vanish cleanly without leaving a single trace or vulnerable endpoint behind. I drove 3 counties west into rural Pennsylvania, eventually checking into a quiet, family-run motel where the air smelled of fresh rain and fallen leaves. I set up my personal air-gapped Linux workstation on the small wooden desk near the window. There was no commercial cloud synchronization running, no proprietary telemetry tracking my inputs, and no corporate bloatware monitoring my network ports. Just a clean, raw terminal environment executing self-contained scripts like a live wire. That was when the passive telemetry alerts began populating my local monitor. Not administrative messages from company leadership, but automated cryptographic pings transmitted directly from Vault 47 itself. My architecture was not merely a passive storage repository. It was an active diagnostic framework. Every time an unauthorized account attempted to force access through an unverified credential path, the system executed an encrypted telemetry ping to private offline workstation node. At 10:22 that evening, the first significant ping illuminated my screen. A junior software engineer named Toby Palmer, a bright, soft-spoken kid fresh out of a top engineering program, attempted to query the master permission registry to resolve a routine database lockup. Vault 47 rejected the request in less than 400 milliseconds. 15 minutes later, someone originating from the internal legal department attempted to force an administrative override using an expired multi-factor authentication recovery address. the exact address I had decommissioned 6 months prior during a comprehensive security overhaul. Watching their rising internal panic unfold in real time tasted sweeter than anything I had experienced in years. They had foolishly assumed they could treat a senior infrastructure architect like an easily swappable piece of office equipment. But what Howard Finch and the executive board failed to comprehend was that I had not merely built software modules. I had established an ironclad operational reputation, quietly, across every internal engineering communication channel. And during late-night technical emergencies with key client directors, I had earned the unyielding trust of the technical staff, who actually kept the company running day after day. By Saturday morning, an insider contact forwarded a screenshot of an internal company-wide memorandum. My name had been completely scrubbed from every software repository, commit log, and internal wiki credit. My title as principal architect had been erased and replaced with a generic label, Centralized Enterprise Infrastructure Team. They wanted the board of directors and institutional investors to believe that a nameless corporate department had delivered Vault 47, completely ignoring the endless 80-hour work weeks I had spent sitting on freezing server room floors with zip ties and diagnostic cables to rescue their network during the third-quarter flood disaster. They thought history could be rewritten by executive mandate and selective memory. Since they were so determined to erase my physical record from corporate history, I decided to leave them a digital ghost that could not be ignored. Working from my isolated workstation, I routed a single, highly subtle validation query through an unmonitored shadow port I had integrated during the initial deployment phase. It was not a malicious hack, a destructive payload, or an unauthorized intrusion. It was a simple, legitimate data integrity check that forced the system to strictly enforce its own established cryptographic rules. If the core system detected an unverified master certificate, it automatically flagged the entire database cluster for manual compliance verification. I closed my laptop terminal and waited for the ripples to spread through their commercial operations. By Monday afternoon, professional networking platforms and industry discussion boards were buzzing with rumors. Howard Finch was publicly tagged in a post by our largest commercial enterprise client, a healthcare logistics firm responsible for over 30% of our annual recurring revenue. The client publicly announced a sudden pause in contract renewal negotiations, citing serious unverified data security and compliance concerns. They demanded an immediate technical audit before another dollar was spent. By midnight, 2 additional enterprise clients followed suit, halting millions of dollars in pending subscription payments. But the crowning moment occurred when an internal risk assessment document from our compliance department was accidentally attached to a public client correspondence thread. The title of the document, printed in bold capital letters at the top of the cover page, read, "Single point of failure, Gordon Vance." They had known all along that I was the sole structural pillar holding up their multi-million-dollar infrastructure. They had simply gambled that they could discard me to save money and run the engine on autopilot. They forgot the most fundamental law of complex engineering. When you fire the architect, you inherit the building collapse. The first major operational collapse occurred 3 days later. It was not a grand explosion or a sudden blackout, but a quiet, agonizing bureaucratic nightmare that paralyzed the entire technology department. A critical priority JIRA ticket appeared on the public engineering board, bearing the frantic title, "Critical Vault Master Key Rotation Failing Across All Production Environments." The ticket was assigned to nobody because nobody left in the building possessed the technical clearance or understanding to execute the task. I reviewed the full text of the ticket on a borrowed tablet while sitting in a quiet highway diner. The contents of the report read like pure poetry: unable to complete mandatory 90-day cryptographic key rotation, access denied by system core, master override path returns fatal security error, no internal documentation located in active archives, terminated principal engineer unreachable by standard channels, system stability deteriorating across all regional clusters. I was that unreachable principal engineer. The master override path was buried deep within 6 nested layers of algorithmic verification, secured by a mathematical salt derived from a unique hardware signature that existed exclusively on my physical cold storage device. 2 hours later, an interim technology management team attempted to manually bypass the security layer by recompiling one of my core background scripts. I watched the live telemetry logs choke, freeze, and stall. You cannot brute force mathematical elegance. You cannot replace 15 years of deep architectural design with hasty code snippets copied from public forums by inexperienced managers. They were burning through backup compute nodes without achieving a single successful handshake, escalating their compute expenditure by hundreds of thousands of dollars in a desperate bid to force a system boot. While their technical infrastructure was rapidly crumbling from within, the corporate communications department published a glossy press release claiming that Apex Global Solutions was undergoing a seamless structural transition to elevate internal engineering talent. Elevate. They could not even rotate a standard security certificate without locking themselves out of their primary production database. Yet they were bragging on financial news outlets about seamless corporate innovation and market leadership. I decided it was time to accelerate their education in real-world technical realities. I contacted an old colleague, Felix Miller, a brilliant former DevOps director who had left the company 2 years earlier to launch his own successful independent infrastructure consultancy. Felix owed me a massive professional debt after I helped him successfully navigate a complex non-compete dispute with former employers years ago. I gave him a single clear instruction: submit a formal corporate proposal to Apex Global Solutions to rebuild their enterprise encryption core from scratch. Felix laughed out loud over the encrypted telephone line. Gordon, they would have to be absolutely out of their minds with desperation to contract an external firm to replace an active production vault. They are already out of their minds with desperation, Felix, I replied calmly. They just have not admitted the full extent of the catastrophe to the board of directors yet. Once they realize they are locked out, they will pay anything to cover their tracks and prevent a public stock collapse. I provided Felix with an anonymized list of structural vulnerabilities within the current system setup, specifically highlighting how the vault would automatically lock down if an unverified user attempted to force a manual database migration during peak commercial traffic hours. Within 20 minutes of reviewing the technical breakdown, Felix's tone turned completely serious. Gordon, he whispered into the receiver, you did not just build a security vault. You built complete operational checkmate against executive greed. Indeed, I had, and the regulatory consequences were already mounting rapidly behind the scenes. The following morning, an internal legal memorandum leaked from the compliance department regarding an active inquiry under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, 18 United States Code, Section 1514A. The memorandum explicitly warned executive leadership that misrepresenting system readiness, altering audit trails, and concealing critical technical single points of failure from investors constituted severe financial noncompliance and securities fraud. By Friday evening at 6:47, long after the executive team had retreated to their weekend estates, a new notification appeared in my encrypted inbox. The sender was Valerie Cross, the senior infrastructure lead. Valerie was a sharp, highly competent engineer who had always deliberately distanced herself from corporate politics. The subject line of her email read, "Off-the-record conversation regarding core stability and administrative emergency." I replied immediately with 4 simple words. You have 10 minutes. We met at a quiet coffee shop tucked away inside a university library on the edge of town. Valerie was already seated in a secluded corner booth, her laptop open, her eyes showing the heavy dark circles of an engineer who had not slept a full hour in 4 straight days. She looked as though she had been carrying the weight of the entire server room on her shoulders while trying to keep the executive committee from completely destroying the enterprise. I did not support your termination, Gordon, she stated immediately as I sat down opposite her. I was not even brought into the discussion until Monday morning, after Howard Finch had already processed the severance paperwork behind closed doors. Seth, the corporate disclaimers. Valerie, I said smoothly, taking a slow sip of black coffee. I am not sitting here seeking personal apologies, corporate sympathies, or empty condolences. Let us focus on the technical reality of the situation and how we resolve it. She nodded nervously, opened a secure, encrypted folder on her laptop screen, and turned the display directly toward me. They are planning an emergency system-wide migration to a third-party vendor vault by the end of the quarter, she explained rapidly. They have put Felix Miller's firm on the short list of candidates. Your name is not mentioned anywhere in the executive briefing document. Of course it was not. Howard Finch was desperate to bury any physical evidence that the company depended entirely on my intellectual property and custom code. They are cutting dangerous corners everywhere, Valerie continued, her voice trembling with frustration. They skipped the mandatory dependency mapping, ignored the failover protocols. An interim CTO, Irene Miller, just ordered the engineering team to recompile your primary authentication modules without verifying the salt hashes. I stared at her in total disbelief. Recompiling the primary authentication modules without salt verification was complete technical suicide. It would immediately corrupt every active user session token across the entire commercial platform, shutting down client portals across 3 continents and triggering immediate breach penalties. Howard believes he can hide the internal instability until after the upcoming quarterly earnings call, Valerie added. But the system is hanging by an absolute thread. One more automated lockdown and the entire board will face immediate shareholder derivative litigation. That was the exact moment I recognized her true motivation for seeking this meeting. Valerie did not just want to fix the system, she wanted to replace Irene Miller as Chief Technology Officer. She was sharp enough to recognize that the current executive leadership was sinking fast, and she wanted to position herself to step into the command role when the structural collapse occurred. You want the CTO position, I observed quietly, leaning back in my chair and studying her reaction. Her complete silence was a total confession. I offered a calm, measured smile. If you want to step up as CTO and rescue this organization from its own executive board, let us make sure you have the exact operational leverage required to clean house completely. We struck a clean, highly strategic agreement right there in the coffee shop. I would not return to the company as an employee, an internal director, or a low-level contractor. However, I would provide Valerie with the exact technical roadmap necessary to stabilize the infrastructure. On one non-negotiable condition, she had to provide me with full, unredacted access to the internal executive communications regarding my termination. She did not hesitate for a single second. She transferred a confidential digital archive containing internal executive emails, financial projections, and signed board minutes directly to my encrypted external drive. Among those confidential files was the ultimate smoking gun, an internal spreadsheet created by Howard Finch titled Senior Overhead Elimination Plan. In that spreadsheet, my position was explicitly listed under a line item that read, Non-Essential Senior Cost Burden. Terminate immediately following Vault 47 deployment to capture executive allocation bonus. Low legal risk. They had intentionally exploited my technical expertise to complete a $40 million project, fully planning my immediate termination to pocket my performance bonus as executive savings. That deliberate act of bad faith manipulation directly violated the Defend Trade Secrets Act, 18 United States Code Section 1836, which strictly prohibits the misappropriation, theft, and bad faith exploitation of proprietary developer trade secrets under fraudulent employment pretenses. On Monday morning at 8 o'clock sharp, that internal spreadsheet was delivered anonymously to every member of the board of directors, key institutional investors, and major technology journalism outlets across the country. Simultaneously, the automated security safeguards embedded within Vault 47 executed protocol read 47. It was not a destructive payload or a malicious hack. It was a strict automated compliance lockdown. The moment the core system detected Irene Miller's unverified script recompile attempt, Vault 47 immediately isolated all database clusters, revoked all temporary administrative credentials, and displayed a bright red warning banner across every internal engineering terminal. Loss of course architectural, lies detected. Core Vault locked to prevent data corruption. Please contact Principal Architect Gordon Vance. The corporate disaster was immediate, absolute, and completely self-inflicted by executive greed. By 9:15 that morning, my private telephone line was ringing continuously without interruption. I had 17 urgent voicemails from internal corporate legal counsel, 5 frantic messages from compliance directors, and 3 direct phone calls from key enterprise client executives demanding immediate system restoration. The corporate switchboard was melting down under the volume of external inquiries and threat of immediate breach lawsuits. At 11 o'clock sharp, I finally decided to accept an incoming call from a blocked number. "Gordon," a voice began. It was Preston Drake, the chief executive officer. He sounded completely defeated, his usual polished corporate bravado replaced by raw, unvarnished panic. I did not say a single word. I simply held the receiver to my ear and let the silence stretch between us for 6 full seconds. In those 6 seconds of complete stillness, Preston was undoubtedly contemplating the total collapse of his corporate legacy. Shareholder derivative lawsuits, federal regulatory fines, massive client contract cancellations, and public embarrassment on national financial news networks. "Gordon, please," Preston stammered, his confidence completely shattered. "We need to resolve this unfortunate situation quietly and discreetly. Name your consulting rate to unlock the primary vault modules and restore baseline service." I almost chuckled at the sheer predictability of his corporate mindset. "You want discretion now, Preston. After you allowed Howard Finch to sit in my office, call my 15-year career redundant overhead, and scrub my name from the architectural foundation of this company, we were under immense pressure from the executive board to reduce senior operational expenditure, Gordon," he pleaded desperately. "We can fix this right now with a generous consulting agreement and full executive compensation." "I am not interested in your executive excuses, Preston," I responded firmly, keeping my tone crisp and clear. "And I am certainly not returning as a temporary contractor to clean up your self-inflicted mess. Here are my non-negotiable terms, delivered in writing to the board of directors by noon today. First, an official, signed board resolution explicitly acknowledging me as the sole author and principal architect of Vault 47, distributed publicly to all shareholders and industry partners. Second, a full retroactive severance package calculated under executive-level golden parachute terms, including all stolen performance bonuses and accelerated equity vesting. Third, the immediate termination of Howard Finch and Irene Miller for egregious managerial gross negligence and bad faith breach of fiduciary duty under Sarbanes-Oxley mandates. Fourth, the complete adoption of Felix Miller's independent consultancy firm to oversee the external system migration. Preston gasped loudly over the line. "Gordon, those financial terms will cost the company millions of dollars. Then you had better calculate how many tens of millions of dollars it will cost when your enterprise clients terminate their contracts at midnight tonight." I replied calmly and hung up the telephone without waiting for a response. He had absolutely no choice. The internal system logs were leaking publicly across tech news outlets. Enterprise clients were preparing formal breach of contract lawsuits. Internal development teams were refusing to touch the corrupted codebase without written legal indemnification from the board. At 11:42 a.m., sharp, Valerie Cross transmitted a scanned copy of the fully executed board resolution directly to my terminal. Every single term had been approved unanimously by the board of directors. Howard Finch was escorted from the headquarters building by security guards before lunch. His executive privileges permanently revoked and his reputation within the financial sector thoroughly incinerated. Interim CTO Irene Miller resigned by late afternoon after leaked Slack messages exposed her openly mocking senior engineering staff. Valerie Cross was officially appointed as the new Chief Technology Officer. 3 days later, my private bank account received the full wire transfer reflecting my executive severance package, retroactive bonus payouts, and intellectual property licensing fees. A total sum that far exceeded anything I would have earned over the next 5 years of routine corporate employment. I used a portion of those funds to establish my own independent software architecture firm, which I named Vault 47 Solutions. We specialize in designing decentralized, tamper-proof security frameworks for enterprise clients, while actively consulting for senior technical professionals navigating bad faith corporate disputes. We give technical founders the legal and computational leverage to defend their work against predatory executive boards. A month after the final settlement was concluded, Howard Finch actually attempted to send me a private email through a mutual professional acquaintance, asking if I would be open to a paid advisory call to help him address an ongoing federal regulatory investigation regarding his past financial filings. I read his desperate message twice, smiled quietly to myself, and typed a single-sentence reply: "You do not have the clearance for this conversation." I attached a copy of his original senior overhead elimination plan spreadsheet, with his digital signature metadata highlighted in bright red ink, and copy-pasted the final log line generated by Vault 47 whenever it completes a successful system boot sequence. In Lead by Principal Architect Gordon Vance, line 47 saved the system. Overhead is never the true cost of doing business. Overhead is simply the heavy price arrogant executives pay when they forget who built the foundation beneath their feet.